Hi, this is Terry with Total Life Pursuit, and we are in relationship. Teaching number 4. I'm going to talk to you today about friendship. Friendship. Proverbs says in chapter 17, verse 17, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Now, the brother being born for adversity means that when you have adversity, the brother is there. But I just wanted you to check this out. A friend loves at all times, which kind of makes me think, what kind of friend am I? And what kind of friends do I have? And what kind of friends is our culture breeding? A friend loves at all times. How about if you disagree politically? How about if you disagree on medical procedures? How about if you disagree on, I don't know, who's going to win the next Super Bowl? The Rams. By the way, this is 2019. It's just a prediction. I don't know. I think our culture has kind of gone a little crazy with this because a good friend really does love you all the time. Not just when it's convenient, not just when they feel like it, and especially not when they agree with you. So, Einstein, when he was developing all his theories, obviously relativity, but so much more than that, he really capsulized the law of attraction. The law of attraction, he put it like an apple is attracted to the ground once you drop it, right? So gravity. The moon is attracted to the earth because of gravity. So attraction really is this pull from an outside source to the other source. In other words, if I'm attractive, people are drawn to me naturally. Are you with me? God's love attracts him. It attracts us to him. It says, don't you want to be closer to me? And I think the deeper we get into God's love and how he really is a friend of ours, the more we figure out how attracted we are to that. And certainly our love attracts us to one another. And I'm going to get to this singles portion. It's a few teachings down, but how to attract a mate. Yep, I'm going to talk about it. I got one, so I'm an expert. All right, here we go. I want to talk to you about David and Jonathan. David and Jonathan. David was a king of Israel, but before he was a king, he was the runt of the litter of all his brothers. But he was anointed king by the priest, high priest then, Samuel. The current king, when Samuel anointed him king, was a guy whose name was Saul. Saul had a son, and his son's name was Jonathan. David and Jonathan developed a relationship. In fact, they developed quite a relationship. After David killed Goliath and was talking with Saul, Jonathan decided that he would love David. There was just something attractive about David to Jonathan. Maybe it was that he had the anointing to become the next king. I don't know what it was. But Jonathan and David decided to make a covenant with one another. Now, covenant is something that we don't quite understand. Even the marriage, quote-unquote, covenant isn't much of a covenant today because when one person breaks it, then, well, you're out. And that's not a covenant. That's a contract. That's what a contract marriage is like. Well, you broke the contract, so now I'm out. A covenant marriage says, I'm going to love you forever. Now, that doesn't mean that, your husband or your wife can, put a gun to your head in the middle of the night and tell you to do things and you should stay there, okay? I'm not saying that. But there is a position of the heart that you've got to decide before you get married. And again, we'll talk about marriage in a few more teachings, but we take it so flippantly. And Jonathan and David entered into a covenant of friendship. Now, I need to say something here. The homosexual community has talked about Jonathan and David as the examples of what a biblical example of two men who loved one another in a romantic way. The Bible doesn't say anything like it. What it does say is they became covenanted together. Now, you have to understand during this time, in this period in history, people were covenanting together all the time. There were, let's say you're a farmer, but you're not a good fighter. And let's say the other guy's a fighter, but not a good farmer. Well, you covenant together. I'll protect you and your farm so it isn't raided, and you feed me and my family. That became a covenant, and they would actually do a covenant ceremony, not similar to our wedding ceremony, but something like that. A ceremony to say, this is a covenant, and usually it would say, and this is what's going to happen to us if the covenant is broken. It was a very, very serious thing. And Jonathan and David had that. Mistakenly, some have put that into a romantic relationship, and it wasn't a romantic relationship. It was a covenantal friendship relationship. That's what it was. They really did love one another deeply from the heart. Didn't we go over that last week? That's what God has told us to do. In fact, that's how He created us to live, is to love one another deeply, not just surfacey. And that separates us from people who just love on the surface. So we rarely find this love between friends, but here is a fantastic example of a friend loves at all times. Jonathan and David. So Jonathan gave David his robe. In other words, he gave him his royalty, saying, we share in royalty. If Jonathan would have been alive when David took the kingship, Jonathan would have been like second in command. But you got to understand, Jonathan, by birthright, should have been the next person in line to be the king. He was Saul's son. That's the king. So he was the king's son. That's who becomes king next. But Jonathan understood David was going to be the king, and he just wanted to be close to him. Okay? So he gave him his robe. He gave him his tunic or his armor, and he said, by doing that, you're saying, I'm going to protect you. He gave him his sword, and by doing that, he said, I'm going to fight for you. He gave him his belt, and by doing that, he said, I'm going to support you. He gave him his bow. Again, I'm going to fight for you. And Jonathan was making David as good as an heir to the throne. Before David rose to any kind of position, Jonathan gave him position through a covenantal relationship. It's pretty cool. David was poor. Jonathan was a prince. Jonathan made David his equal. I hope you just got that. In friendship, you make others your equal, even if they're poor or lack intelligence or they're out of shape or whatever it is. You make them your equal. Jonathan did. He argued for David. With his father, he argued for David. He supplied for David behind his father's back. He spied for David. He warned David when his father was coming. He encouraged David. He prophesied to David about David's reign. He risked his life for David because his dad was trying to kill David. And Saul tried to kill Jonathan for warning David. And Saul definitely tried to kill David, but David always got away. Why is that? Like, really good? Well, he was really good at warfare. He got away because God had anointed him for king. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we were in that last week, but let me just go through one verse. Verse 7, love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. So love trusts and has faith. It considers someone worthy of putting their trust in. Love necessitates, then, us trusting people. Now, wait a second. I don't know if I can trust. I'm just telling you what the word says about love. Trusting people necessitates being disappointed and hurt when they don't come through. Well, see, I shouldn't have trusted him. That's not how it works. Because when you don't put trust in anybody, when you don't put trust in people, in a friend, they will likely meet your expectations. When you put trust in them, they have a greater probability of meeting your expectations. Yeah, sure, they'll let you down sometimes. So what are you going to do? Not have friends? Not trust? Not love? That's not a life. You're not here to feel good. You're here to lift them up. That's what friendship is. It's lifting somebody else up. It's a good word right there. Some people want to avoid pain and suffering at all cost. That's a problem. I mean, that's what we do in this culture. I don't want any pain. I don't want any disappointment. I don't want anything. So I'm going to assume that everything's going to go bad. That way I won't be disappointed. What a terrible way to live. And by the way, your brain won't function right when you think negatively like that. It just won't. It's not made to. You can't make it function right when you're thinking negative like that. So any letdown and disappointment or distress or displeasure they want to avoid in life, that's a bad place to be. Because everything worth something costs you something. Everything worth something costs you something. Even coming to Christ, it costs you your life. You have to yield willingly your life up to Him. It costs you something, but it's worth it, right? Hello? Okay, that's good. So, is it any wonder our friendships are shallow because we don't want to be disappointed, so we don't love deep and we don't trust people? Trust flows from love. So what do you do with an untrustworthy person who's proven themselves untrustworthy time and time and time again? You have hope. That's what you have. It's biblical hope is a confident expectation that it will happen. But you have to have some hope. You say, well, I don't have any hope. This has happened, I have no hope. You need to go get some. You need to go spend some time with God and get some hope. Sounds easy, doesn't it? I know, I'm so sorry. But what's our alternative? Live without hope? Live without love? Live without trusting people? No, that's not a way to do it. Now you might think, yeah, but doesn't wisdom say, if there was a child molester that you wouldn't have him babysit your kids? Yes, wisdom says that. Wisdom says a lot of things like that. Of course, somebody who crashed your car the last time they borrowed it, should you give it to them again? I mean, I'll even go less than that. If they brought it back dirty, filled with In-N-Out, or even worse, McDonald's wrappers and stuff, would you give it to them again? I don't know that I would. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about having faith in people. We're talking about building them up, speaking encouragement to them, not talking about giving ourselves away in our personhood, okay? Or the resources that God has given us, by the way. You use wisdom there. Jesus used wisdom. John chapter 2, verse 24. Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all men. He did not need man's testimony about man, for he knew what was in a man. In other words, he didn't need someone to testify about him or tell him how good he was or who he was. So he didn't entrust his heart to them in order for them to regurgitate to him or to say to him, hey, you're awesome. He didn't need that from them. He got that from God. I hope you just got that. I hope you just put those two together because this is a very, very important point. Jesus did not entrust his identity to anybody but God. I think our problem is when we have friends and they disappoint us, that speaks about us instead of about them. See, we're all offended and all hurt. How could they do that to me? What we're really saying is, they were assigning me. They were assigning my value. They now undervalued me or didn't value me, so I am not valuable. I'm not saying that it shouldn't have any effect on you at all, but we should be able to get over it pretty quickly. Why is that? Because they don't assign a value to me. God assigns value to me. He assigns worth to me. He assigns my identity. Not my wife or my kids, not my pastor, not my church, not my friends. Nobody gets to assign my identity. So when they disappoint me, I'm disappointed, but I'm not devastated. I'm not devastated. I hope you can get that. I do think, as I was thinking, I thought, how about the person who has a spouse that cheats on him? Devastating? Devastating. Absolutely. But this is the question I have for you. Who are you? Are you something without them? And if you aren't, then you've lost yourself in them instead of losing yourself in Christ. And that's something that you really need to think about. Because God wants you to lose yourself in Him. But He's not saying that it shouldn't hurt you. Okay? Believe me, Jesus felt the tinge of rejection. He did. He felt it. But He didn't get named by it. That wasn't who He was, the rejected one. Okay. There are different levels of relationship, obviously. Jonathan and David were close friends. And you can't have a lot of friends like that are super close. You can't be like close with everybody. Hi, I'm your best friend. How many best friends do you have? I have 24. How many do you have? You can't be best friends like that with everybody. Of course, you've got to have different levels of friendship. I heard Danny Silk use an illustration. It's a good one. And he said, when an acquaintance of mine at church, someone I know by name and by face, but we don't really get together that much, if at all. I just know them. They call me and say, oh, dude, my car blew up, man. My engine just blew up and my car's toast. And I say, oh, dude, I'm so sorry. I'm going to pray for you, man. See, when a good friend calls me, a friend of mine that we get together, and I'm like, then he calls me, says the same thing, my car blew up. I say, oh, is there anything I can do? Maybe I know, I think I saw, this good mechanic, or I saw a good deal on something, on another car or something like that. When my best friend calls me and says, hey, my car blew up, I say, hey, do you need a ride somewhere? Or why don't I just, look, I'm not using the car that much. You have to travel further than I do. I'll just use my other car and we'll kind of switch it around. And you just take my car until you get yours fixed. See, that's my good friend. Now, when my kids call and say, hey, I blew up my car, I say, well, it's your car, too bad. No, I don't. I say, well, I'm going to come get you, and then you'll just use our car. We'll just cooperate with our car. They're kind of like a good friend, a really good friend. When my wife calls me and says, honey, I blew up the car. It's sitting on the side of the road in an ash heap. I say, honey, I'll grab my checkbook and we'll go car shopping. And I buy her another car because that's my close friendship. Are you with me? So there's different levels of friendship, and you've got to be okay with those different levels. And when people don't want you at their best friend level, you've got to allow them that choice. So that means you've got to acclimate to their level that they're willing to have. Okay, there's nothing worse than a mismatched friendship. It's kind of like a mismatched dating relationship. Dating, I'm going to talk about that in a future one too, but here's the deal. Someone wants to get married, the other person just wants to hang out. That's not a good relationship to stay in for either one of them. The pressure to get married to the one who just wants to hang out, and the rejection of not getting married to the person who wants to just hang out, from the person who wants to just hang out. Get yourself out of that relationship or acclimate to it. And I would submit to you it's pretty hard to acclimate a romantic relationship. Oh yeah, I used to want to get married to them, but now I just want to hang out. Which I don't even go for that anyways, but I think you get my point. There's different levels of relationship. Jonathan and David had a very, very close one. And I'd like to suggest that we are created to have a close one like that, but not with everybody. I hope you heard that today. Friend loves at all times. This is Terry, Total Life Pursuit. I'll see you next time.